Empower Black men to live extraordinary lives. Shatter the stereotypes. Power Black men. Power Black men. Shatter the stereotypes. Power Black men to live extraordinary lives. Shatter the stereotypes. Shatter the stereotypes. Power Black men to live extraordinary lives.
Welcome to Shatter the Stereotypes, where the intention is to empower Black men to live extraordinary lives. This show is based on the simple idea that every Black man is capable of creating inner peace, dynamic health, great relationships, and financial abundance. Therefore, we provide insights and strategies to educate, motivate, and inspire Black men to reach their full potential and create the life of their dreams. So if you're ready for some high-octane motivation and inspiration that supports and empowers you to live the life you were born to live, get ready to shatter the stereotypes so you can build a life that lights you up and positively impacts the world. So now, let's shatter the stereotypes with your host, Coach Michael Taylor.
Hello and welcome to Shatter the Stereotypes, where the intention is to empower Black men to live extraordinary lives. You see, there's never been a shortage of Black male role models. There's only been a lack of exposure of those role models in mainstream media. So my intention is to showcase and highlight Black men who are doing amazing things in the world. And joining me today is a man who is doing just that. His name is Maliek Blade, and he has an amazing platform called Whole Brother Mission. And I want to play a short little video clip that talks about his organization. So let's see.
First things first, rest in peace, Uncle Phil. For real, you the only father that I ever knew.
One of the most memorable moments from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was when Will broke down in Uncle Phil's arms after his father reappeared, made promises, broke them, and then disappeared again. Will asked the famous question,
"How come you don't want me, man?"
Baby Boy depicted a young man named Jody who in his adult life struggled to grow out of adolescence and put away childish things. Then there's the classic Boys in the Hood, which contrasts the life of Trey, who has a father present, with his friends Ricky and Doughboy who don't. Their stories end very differently. Whether it's caused by an absentee father or growing up in an under-resourced neighborhood, the trauma is there and art that reflects it is profitable. But what is being done to help those boys and men pick up the pieces? Who is there to support those that are living this reality currently? The Whole Brother Mission seeks to equip men to be whole in every area of life. Wholeness isn't perfection, but it is optimum health. We believe we can get there by focusing on our three core areas: the head, the heart, and the hands. The head is mental health. We have to get our minds right. To that end, we offer access to licensed professional counselors and therapists to our members, free of charge. The heart is emotional maturity. It's very hard to deal with the emotions of another if I haven't taken the time to process through my own. We also offer access to life coaches and mentors to our members, free of charge. The hands represent professional advancement. Life is always a bit easier when your bills are paid. We've created an online life skills program that helps our members think through practical steps to build entrepreneurship, pursue higher education, and financial literacy. We're always looking for partners to help us create resources that normalize the conversation around men pursuing serious self-assessment. This is all made possible through giving. We ask that you join us in our mission.
All right. So that is such a powerful, powerful mission. And Maliek, you are one of the brothers why I do this podcast, is because I want to showcase and highlight men like yourself who are doing amazing things. So without further ado, let's get you introduced to the audience. So how you doing today?
I'm great, how are you?
All righty. So again, I don't even remember how I found you online, but I saw your work and I said, man, this is a brother that I got to get on the show. So before we start talking about your work though, let's just jump into a few icebreaker questions. So first of all, just tell us where you're from and tell us a little bit about growing up. What was that like for you?
Sure. So I'm originally from Southeast Washington, D.C. And over the course of from then until now, I've had the opportunity to live in D.C., Maryland, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and California. So I just worked my way on across over the years. And that period between Oklahoma to California was the launch of the Whole Brother Mission. Uh, just for me, I pretty much have observed certain things over the course of my time in my personal life, but also professionally as it relates to Black men, our emotions, our experiences, and observing those things time and time again were a burden for years. And then eventually I began to put some pieces together and make sense of it all. And pretty much that's how we get the Whole Brother Mission.
Nice. So again, we're going to talk about your work, but first of all, name a woman who's inspired you to be who you are.
My 6th grade teacher, Donna Drakeford.
Ah, interesting. It's amazing how those teachers can have such a positive impact in my life. I think about my 2nd grade teacher, Miss Bussey, and that's been 50 something years ago, but I still remember the lessons that I learned from her. So name a man that you look up to and admire.
My brother, my older brother. We're 15 years apart.
Oh, wow. What's his name?
His name is Jerome Gay. He's a pastor in Raleigh, North Carolina. And part of the reason that I made that first move from DC to North Carolina for college.
Okay. Now, if you were trapped on an island for a month and you could only take one book with you, what book would you take while you were trapped on that island?
For me, man, one book.
One book. 30 days.
I mean, I guess I have to say the Bible. There
okay.
We go. Yeah, for me.
Right. Now, you like movies?
Yeah. Yeah.
Name a movie that you like and tell me why you like it.
It's a movie called Crash that I have never forgot for some reason. Saw it. Was really young when it came out. And I think it was the first time that I saw certain race issues addressed in a direct way. I knew that type of stuff existed, but to see it depicted in a film, that stood out to me a lot. So that movie Crash has always stuck with me. And then later in life, I began to deal with race relations and things like that more directly. So it became real, and I began to see kind of the movie playing out in real life on a personal level.
Yeah, very powerful, powerful movie. I love that movie. It really captured, from my experience, what I got out of it was how, I don't know if you remember the scene where he's pulled over by the police officer, and he and his wife are in a truck. He gets pulled over, and the police officer is basically abusing his wife, and he's got to make a choice. He's either gonna try to help his wife, or he's going to not do anything so he doesn't get killed. So it's so many layers to that movie. But yes, it's a very powerful, powerful movie about race. If I gave you a magic wand and you could create anything your heart desired, what would your life look like 10 years from now?
So you're just talking about more so for me personally rather than the world around me?
However you choose to define it. You got this magic wand, you can do whatever you want with that wand. What would your life look like 10 years from now?
I would say, and this may end up feeling really specific, but I feel as though it's difficult to exist in a world where people are not very in touch with their own emotions and views and feelings and trauma and things of that nature. So a lot of times people have arguments and you're going back and forth. I see it in politics. I see it about race. I see it amongst Black people. I see it in other races. It's everywhere, where people aren't even communicating clearly because they're actually leading with their hurt because they haven't processed through it. So if I could have that magic wand, I would kind of use a spell to make us more emotionally intelligent so that we can have better interpersonal dialogues, so that people with different ideological views can discuss things in a logical way rather than yelling at each other. And I think that one element would make a much more comfortable environment, even with the diversity of views and races and cultures. If we could do better with that, I think it would make a significant difference for me personally and for everyone else.
Powerful. It's very powerful. Now, as a man who happens to be Black, I'm curious, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future in general?
I tend to lean more pessimistic, unfortunately, just because because of what I just said in the last answer. But I try to stay optimistic, but unfortunately, I think we're up against so much history that is profitable. So it is really hard to turn the tide in terms of the way things are. That kind of my side against your side mentality, the poor against the rich, all these different things. I think that is so deeply baked into our society that it is going to be really hard to change that. It's possible, but it is a large task.
Now, I wrote a book titled The Cure for Onlyness, A Black Man's Guide to Joy, Passion, and Purpose. And the book addresses the feeling of onlyness that we as Black men sometimes experience when we're in environments where we're the only person of color. So I'm sure you've had that experience. So I'm wondering, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I stay myself unapologetically. So I actually had that direct experience. So when I moved from DC to North Carolina, I went to college, and I went to a predominantly white college. And I was one of two Black males in the college. Wow. And the other Black guy didn't live on campus. So I was the only one there. To condense the story, I ended up working at the school in the president's office for diversity relations to help them think through race issues and diversifying and so on and so forth. And, one of the things that I ran into quite a bit was the number of Black people grew at that institution. But I think that within that institution, the white people there were more comfortable with Black people that were focused on assimilating and shedding any cultural differences. So they preferred Black people that were interested in being white, at least culturally, marrying interracially and things of that nature. And it's not that things wrong with that, but I think the issue becomes where you're hiding parts of yourself to be accepted. So I was the type of person that didn't do that at all. I was confident who I was, being a guy from DC, and I was myself there. And the people that adjusted, and the people that had issues, and I ended up working for the president. So, the qualities that I brought to the table, I think, worked in my favor. And if I had tried to assimilate and hide those, I wouldn't have gotten the opportunities that I did.
Yeah, and I think that's the key is self-awareness, understanding who you are, being comfortable in yourself, knowing what you bring to the table, knowing that you show up in a way, I would say, as a powerful Black man with some intelligence that knows who he is. And that's what we need to do as Black men. We need to not be intimidated if we're in environments where we're the only person of color, because if we know who we are, we should be able to express that. And like I said, don't assimilate, don't code switch and try to be different. Just be who you are authentically. And that's how you change people's minds about who we are as Black men. So that's a really powerful point. So let's talk about your Whole Brother Mission platform. So first of all, why did you name it Whole Brother Mission?
Whole Brother Mission, the idea of wholeness comes from trying to find a medium between being in a unhealthy spot versus being perfect. And I think somewhere in the middle, you'll find wholeness, which isn't necessarily perfection, but it is functioning at optimum health. Comes with a level of awareness of your strengths and your weaknesses. So it's more so the knowledge rather than the practice of perfection. And that word, I think, encapsulates our three core areas, which are the head, the heart, and the hands. So as the video mentioned, I think if you get those three areas at a stable point, you can experience wholeness. And once again, it's not perfection, but it's a great place to start. So the head is mental health, the heart is emotional maturity, and the hands represent professional advancement. Because you can feel good and think good, but if you don't have resources, that's a difficult spot to be in too. So that, in a very practical sense, resources and professional advancement are important as well. So I think when you have those things mixed together at healthy points, you can experience wholeness. And wholeness isn't a destination necessarily, but it is a state of being that is evolving over time. So wholeness for you at 16 may look different at 46, but it's mindfulness is definitely a part of it. Self-awareness, as I mentioned, emotional maturity and mental health. And I think our focus is normalizing these things for men, because so often I've found that we don't necessarily prioritize our mental health or emotional health. We become more focused on tasks. So essentially, the goal is for us to redefine what it means to be masculine or a man. And that doesn't mean killing masculinity or throwing away everything, but it means adjusting things to have a more nuanced and robust view of what it means to be a man for the benefit of other men and our families.
Yeah, and that's my area of expertise is the changing roles of manhood and masculinity in society. Written several books about that. So I'm curious, what's your take? You've probably heard this term, toxic masculinity. What's your take on toxic masculinity?
I know that when I hear it, I know that more traditional men push back on it because they think that it means that you want me to shed my boldness, my propensity to protect and provide and things of that nature. And that's not my understanding of it, but I see why they're pushing back on that. My understanding of it, and I don't use the term because I know that there's so much misunderstanding. I try to address it in different ways. But essentially, what I would be getting at and what I think it's seeking to address is misguided notions about masculinity and manhood that are actually unhealthy. We think that we're doing something good, but it's actually something bad. So I think toxic masculinity doesn't necessarily mean that men should be feminine, but it means that men should rethink what it means to be masculine. There are certain things that we think are positives that are actually negatives.
Yeah. So my take is slightly different because the way I see it is masculinity is just an energy. You have masculine energy, you have feminine energy. Men have feminine energy. Men might balk at that idea, but that's just part of being human. So for me, there's really no such thing as toxic masculinity. There's only toxic behaviors. And toxic behaviors are the result of men who are disconnected from their authentic masculinity. So again, you can get caught up into the semantics of it, but I noticed that it's something that you're hearing a lot in the media about. And so when I think of toxic masculinity, my go-to is, so how can we get men to not exhibit toxic behaviors? One way to do that is to help them get in touch with what you just mentioned about the head, the heart, and the hands, is when we can get men to connect authentically with their hearts and understand their emotions, they're less likely to engage in what we might call toxic behaviors. So with that being said, I'm curious, so what was the trigger? What caused you to want to launch Whole Brother Mission? Was there an event or what triggered the movement?
Sure. What I observed was, one example is my time working in universities. I had quite a few African-American students come to my office as I was a dean. So I had to deal with discipline and things of that nature. So let's just say you'd have a football player that got in trouble for doing XYZ. That situation played itself out time and time again. And the goal was to be restorative, not just disciplinary. So we talked through what got them in the office in the first place. And something that came up quite a bit was family issues that never really got resolved, or things that happened to them that they've been tucking for years that may produce anger or other toxic behaviors, as you mentioned. So at some of those institutions, there was a goal of, I said, being restorative. So that included not just discipline, but something that will help them, like mandating counseling and or therapy. And it was like clockwork. Anytime you bring that up to one of these African American male students, there's, well, that's for crazy people. And they're going to say I'm crazy and I can't do that. It's going to label me forever. So you'll be observing some severe issues. I remember one was suicidal. And you have these high level issues, but guys refuse to get any support or help or, from a professional rather than just venting. Because venting is one thing, but you got to get past venting at some point. So I noticed that stigma was there in my work life, but I had also seen it over the course of my whole life in a personal sense that at a basic level, a lot of men only feel comfortable expressing the emotion of anger, and the others just tuck away or pretend like they aren't there. So observing things like this time and time again within our culture and seeing the aftermath of it on how it affects the individual and some of the college students, some of the adults I know, but also how an unhealthy male affects the women around him, whether it be his daughter or spouse or girlfriend or whatever, or mom or whatever the case may be, or sister. So observing all these things was the motivation for the Whole Brother Mission, in the sense that we wanted to, one, destigmatize men seeking additional support services, and two, create more access to those support services, because sometimes people are interested in seeing a therapist, but finances may be a barrier. So that's why one of the main things we do is aggressively fundraising to cover the fees for those that are unemployed and uninsured but need to see a therapist.
So what experience did you have launching a nonprofit? How did you get into that?
So the universities that I worked at previously were nonprofits. So I worked in the president's office at one of them and the other at an executive level. So that familiarized me with how those types of institutions work. But also, coincidentally, I have quite a few friends that already have had successful nonprofits. So those two together gave me the insights on where to start. I knew what I wanted to do in terms of casting vision, but also you also bring in the expertise of others. So every nonprofit has a board. So everyone, you can't exist in a vacuum. So you essentially would want to establish a board of people with expertise in different areas, so everyone's bringing something unique to the table. And that's what we did with the Whole Brother Mission, and planning out for about a year, bringing the voices of multiple people to the table before the official launch. And I think my experience contributes toward that a little bit, but there are others within our team that were more directly involved with nonprofits.
So tell us a little bit about how your services work. So let's say there's a guy that, may need some support, don't know where to turn. So do they contact you, or tell me how would it work? How does your services work?
Sure. So if someone was interested in being connected with the mental health professional, they would reach out via wholebrothermission.com. There's a Get Help tab, and there you would fill out an intake form. And from there, you'd be scheduled for an intake call where you would speak with a team member about what your concerns are and what has caused you to seek some additional support services. And then from there, you'll be made aware of what services we have that will best suit you. So as an overview, in one sense, we are a referral service. So if you come to us and you say, I have Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance and I'm in Texas, then we'll try to connect you with someone within our network in Texas that takes that insurance. We have a team of over 3,000 mental health professionals nationwide. So one is referring. Two is a subscription service similar to online therapy platforms, Talkspace and BetterHelp. Those platforms allow you to sign up for a subscription and begin to speak to a therapist virtually. Our subscription service allows you to speak to your therapist in person through a subscription. So you have that option of having therapy without involving insurance. And then for the people that are both unemployed and uninsured, You simply fill out that form, fill out the information, and there's somewhat of a vetting system. And for those that are eligible, if you're both unemployed and uninsured and you meet the additional criteria, we pay the therapist directly on your behalf. And that's how we get them within our network. We have an established rate where we pay the counselors on your behalf so that you are able to have access to the mental health professional without the concern of insurance or finances. But also, it's not limited to a certain number of sessions without the therapist getting paid. Similar organizations create a group of therapists that they get to agree to do a certain amount of free sessions. And we try to look at this from a twofold perspective. We want to help Black people, but that includes helping and supporting and paying Black therapists. So we don't want to take money out of their pockets either. So we do both ends of it, paying the therapist on your behalf without taking money out of the pockets of Black therapists.
So it's no longer an excuse for you if you're watching this video and you've been thinking about therapy and you're concerned about cost. If you can't afford it, here's an opportunity to connect with some support that can support you if you're unable to pay. So therefore, there's no excuse not to get help. there's help available if you're willing to go. So I'm curious, Maliek, so how important is it for Black men to have therapists that look like them?
I think that's a huge part of it. So something that we found is a reoccurring story is, hey, I tried therapy. I went to who my insurance said I could go to. It was a white female, and she was okay, but she just didn't understand certain things, and I had to over-explain and re-explain and so on and so forth. So I don't necessarily agree with the idea that a therapist of a different race can't help, but I do know that a therapist of a different race can be a barrier sometimes. So the idea of shopping around makes sense, and it's to be expected. There are some benefits, I think, that come with culture and history and background, and it's very simple ideas. We all tend to segregate ourselves to a certain extent, and I wouldn't say that all aspects of segregation are bad. There's some benefit to that too, in terms of a communal story, an understood history, certain language barriers that aren't there when you're having people that come from similar cultures, and so on and so forth. And of course, I would say Black men have a unique background as well that's understood most clearly by Black men. So there's benefits there that I think will allow you to get much further down the road in therapy, which is why the majority of the mental health professionals within our network are Black. But we do have people of different races as well, because sometimes someone may come to therapy and they're like, for what I'm dealing with, I need an outside perspective. So it all depends on what that person is coming in for. But I do think very acutely, there's a benefit to having a Black male therapist, because our experience is very unique and oftentimes misunderstood by others outside of our community.
Yeah, and the key to transformation, the key to change is trust. And so if you go to someone who may not look like you, there could be a barrier of lack of trust. For example, if you have someone that has a distrust of white people because of some experiences in their own lives, it's difficult for them to trust that person, if you will, who doesn't look like them. So it's important, I think, really important to have people of color that, as you mentioned, will fully understand where you're coming from without any of the possible hidden racial biases. But like yourself, I agree that a therapist does not have to be of the same color or ethnicity. But as you mentioned, I think there are some advantages when they are. Now, with that being said, does it make a difference between male and female? As far as therapy?
Right. Yeah, it just depends. It depends on the person. So I'm never going to say any absolute in terms of the type of therapist. It's just, it varies by case. I've seen several times people benefit from a therapist of the same gender and benefit tremendously from therapists of a different gender and race as well. So it's a case by case thing.
Gotcha. Now, gaining the courage to go to therapy is difficult. And obviously,
Mhm.
one of the most difficult things is actually finding or choosing the right therapist. So, what advice would you give to a man who's ready to try therapy, but he's really struggling with how do I choose the right therapist? What advice would you give to him?
I would say definitely one, reach out to the Whole Brother Mission. 'Cause we can help you in that process, because with our intake call, we talk through things like that and tell you things to be aware of that you may not know about, all free of charge, just to kind of get you in the door so you don't feel like you have to pay this large amount just to talk to a professional. You can at least have some experimenting questions over the phone with us before committing to someone. Uh, I understand that it's difficult as well to shop around, because therapy is not as simple as trying on a t-shirt, but you're being very deep and transparent and reflective on things. And who wants to keep doing that over and over again with a new person? So I do find it really important to try to get the right person the first time, so you don't have to feel like you keep opening yourself back up, as we say. But the reality is you may not get it right the first time in terms of who you pick or who you're placed with. So be open to shopping around to find the right fit. It's okay to fire your therapist. You have no obligation to them like many of us feel to our barber. It's very different. So please feel free to go to someone else that is able to help with what you need.
Now, I've come to know that there are really only two things that will cause a man to want to change. One is pain, and the other is what I call divine discontent, which is that inner feeling, that knowing that something, we may not have the word for it, we just feel like something's off in our lives. So I'm curious, with your own personal journey, what triggered you to begin your process of transformation and healing?
I think at a very young age, I recognized that I didn't control my environment. 'Cause even if I wanted to, I didn't. So rather than um pretending to have a level of control, I thought, or I recognized that to deal better with this environment, it's better to focus on understanding the people around you. And that's a better way to deal with it. So education became super important, to understand how the world works, how your community works, how people think, so that you can interact better with them. And I think that's the difference maker, uh, was the difference maker for me, but can be the difference maker for a lot of other people, is how you deal with the environment. But I think how you deal with the environment is going to go back to your upbringing. So the benefit for me was, although there was some level of brokenness within my family, I was able to go out into the world with a level of security. So I didn't go into the world looking to get something. I recognized the brokenness within the world, and went out with something to offer. But I think if you're going out with your hand out needing something, you could end up being tossed and turned around, and it could be very overwhelming for you. So I would hope that, and this is why we do what we do, we seek to have whole families, so that parents can send children out into the world that are secure in their identity because of their foundation, and not using the world to create an identity.
Mm. So in your book, you mentioned that you've been called an old soul. And
Yeah.
after reading some of it, I have to agree. So I'm curious, first of all, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
28.
28, okay.
hmm
So you've obviously accomplished a lot at a very young age. So I'm curious to know, where do you think that drive comes from for you? I mean, like I said, you've done a lot and you've accomplished a lot, and you have this commitment to supporting and empowering people. So I'm curious, what's the driving factor behind that?
Hmm. That's a good question. I feel like I have an answer for just about everything 99% of the time. But that question, I'm really not sure. It just has always been this way. So I I don't really know. Because my first thought was, well, can I recall a time where I wasn't, but I really can't. So I'm really not sure where it comes from because I don't know any other
Right.
form.
That's an old soul.
Okay. There you go.
It's just in you to make a difference in the world, and it's commendable. Again,
I appreciate that.
Commitment to people. So that's pretty amazing. So I want to talk a little bit about now about trauma and things like that. So I want to read something that Iyanla Vanzant wrote a while back that I read that I think is really, really powerful. I think every Black man should really read this and listen to it and understand the depth of it. So I want to get your feedback. And it says, until you heal the wounds of your past, you are going to bleed. You can bandage the bleeding with food, with alcohol, with drugs, with work, with cigarettes, with sex. But eventually, it will all ooze through and stain your life. You must find the strength to open the wounds, stick your hands inside, pull out the core of the pain that is holding you in your past, the memories, and make peace with them. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that I agree with it. I remember something that she said recently Iyanla said recently in an interview where she talked about healing work versus growth work and how you need to do some healing work to be prepared for the growth work. But if you jump to the growth work and you haven't healed, then it'll probably be a bumpy road. So I would agree. I think that reminds me specifically of a chapter within the book. So the latter part of the book addresses myths about manhood. And one of the myths is that distractions are solutions. So her statement reminds me of that on how we use different things to bandage. But in another form of that is we're distracting ourselves from what is wrong temporarily rather than actually dealing with what is wrong. So the distractions that I reference that men often use are alcohol, drugs, and sex to distract from pain, trauma, or unresolved issues. So I do think it takes a level of boldness and security to seek to resolve issues. When we talk about these ideas of masculinity and how people perceive it, I would say that generally speaking, for people that do use the term, it's understood as being assertive and direct. So the way that I try to encourage guys to be more intentional about healing and dealing with issues is that if you see yourself or if you intend to be a masculine man, if someone was breaking into your home and attempting to steal from your family or hurt your family, we would see it as a masculine man or a man's man would address the intruder directly. We would suck our teeth at the man that runs out the back door and leaves his family in the home. And that's the difference between being assertive versus passive. I believe in the same way, we have to be that way with our trauma and our areas of brokenness, rather than being the guy that runs out the back door by just drinking it away or smoking it away or just trying to have sex to stop thinking about it. Those issues are still going to be there when that high or that moment of pleasure ends. So I think for those that adhere to that, they should also see that idea of masculinity tying to dealing with their broken areas and be assertive and direct with healing those areas.
Yeah, because I know for a long time, I hid behind the motivational, super positive guy, right? So you're probably familiar with Anthony Robbins, the motivational speaker guy, and Anthony Robbins.
Yes.
Yeah. So, for example, I did Anthony Robbins, walking on hot coals barefoot kind of thing. So I was always highly motivated, but yet there were some childhood traumas that I was avoiding. And so one way that I tried to cope with that trauma was being successful. Because for me, it was like I had such a deep sense of shame I was trying to get validation from others by accomplishing things. And so I think a lot of times what will happen is we'll pretend to be something out of fear of not being liked or whatever. But the point that I'm making here is that I thought, because I was motivated, I was successful by society standards, and I had it all together. But the truth was, it wasn't until I really took that deep dive into the origins of my pain. And the origins of my pain began from a very, very abusive childhood, right, between 6 and 13. And there's a guy named John Bradshaw, who's a therapist who is no longer with us, but he had a 3-day workshop called Healing the Inner Child. And I went to this 3-day workshop and did his work and processed through years and years and years of suppressed and repressed pain that I didn't even know I had. But it wasn't until I did that work that I would call what I would call experience true wholeness and understanding who I am as a human being, being comfortable in my own skin, unpacking all that emotional baggage. And that's something that I've seen very few Black men talk about, that process, that healing process of dealing with childhood trauma. Now, the good news is I've noticed that there are a lot more people like yourself that are now beginning to talk about it. You know, we hear a lot about mental health these days, which, 20 years ago, think about it. Well, you were only 8, but
yeah,
but the
but it wasn't. Yeah,
the conversation wasn't there. So I'm really optimistic because when I see people like yourself. So the point that I want to make here for the viewers, especially as Black men, is we must be willing to unpack our emotional baggage. And you can pretend and you can, skirt around it, or you can avoid it, but eventually it's going to show up in your life somehow. So why not gain the courage to say, you know what? I want to transform my life. I want to be my authentic self. And to make that commitment to yourself is the beginning, is you're making that commitment. And now you need to take some action steps to make that happen. And if you're unsure of where to go, what to do, I think a great place to start would be by contacting Maliek and his organization. Because again, I think as Black men, we have this idea that nobody's going to understand my pain. There's like, we
care.
Our care, exactly. Our care about my pain. So I will assert that people do care. People can understand and will understand if you're courageous enough to step into this process. And it begins with a simple idea, being willing to say, I need help. There's absolutely no shame in saying, I need help. It's not a sign of weakness. I will assert it's the greatest show of strength that you'll ever exhibit, by simply saying, I need help. Because there's a lot of us that are carrying around a lot of pain, a lot of baggage. So I want you to release that baggage. I want you to know that there's the other side. The other side is where you get to be whole. You get to be free. You get to be connected to who you truly are as a human being. And it's a process. It's a journey. It's not a destination. So I also want to talk about real quick, Maliek, if we could, this whole idea of codependence. And I know as men, we probably don't understand it or even talk about it, but can you kind of give us some insights on what codependence is?
I typically hear it discussed from the negative perspective, in that someone isn't stable on their own, so they need someone else to feel secure. But I think there's 2 layers to it. There's a negative codependence and a healthy codependence. So I would say the negative version of this looks more like, honestly, just to couch this for men specifically, it's a lack of security. And this is an example of how this plays out in men. Codependence plays out in men that we may not recognize as codependence. Many of us seek identity or value or affirmation through women. And if women are not responding to you the way you would like, then you are crushed and the air is out of your sail, wind's out of your sail. And some of us might just see that as men being men, but that's actually a level of codependence where I am not secure in who I am, so I'm depending on you to give me that security. So that's one example of how that would look. And that's the most common example of it amongst men. And I do think that's something that we should disconnect from just being a masculine or man thing. And it's more so an insecurity thing. It'd be much better to find security and stability on your own as an individual based off of your qualities and what you bring to the table and how you develop as an individual, and then invite a partner into sharing that with you rather than using them to feel that. That's codependence, unhealthy codependence. A more healthy version, I think, is let's use the word love. I think when it comes to love in the romantic sense, it also comes with a level of vulnerability where that person you are in love with has the ability to hurt you in a way where someone who you don't love may not. And to a certain extent, you're at that person's mercy because of the access that they have been granted or that they have. And you can see this in other relationships too. So there is a level to which boundaries need to be set and adjustments need to be made for a healthy relationship, because there is a codependence between the parties. If those boundaries aren't set, it could end up being unhealthy. So I do think that that level of dependence, after having established that relationship, there's a sense to where it can be healthy as well, because there are things that I get from you and there's things that I bring to the table and vice versa. So it's not always all bad. It just depends on the context of the relationship and the history that's been built between the parties beforehand. So there's a healthy codependence in father to son, wife to husband, and relationships like that.
Mm. Now, I didn't ask this question, but are you a therapist yourself?
I would say counselor.
Counselor. Okay, you're a
Yeah.
counselor. All right.
Mhm.
And I think I read somewhere that you're working on a degree in something or other. What are you pursuing?
Yeah, I'm finishing. Yep, I'm finishing my doctorate in counseling now. Start
Okay.
my dissertation next year. It should be graduating if everything goes well. Should be graduating summer 2023.
Nice. Now, one
Mhm.
of your focuses in your book is you talk a lot about fatherhood.
Yeah.
And obviously that's a big part of our community that I believe we really need to put a little more attention and focus on. Now, the media would have you believe collectively as Black men, we're all deadbeat dads that, don't want to take care of our kids, which being a deadbeat dad has nothing to do with ethnicity. It has more to do with masculinity and how we as men can learn to connect authentically and emotionally with our children. So I'm curious, you talk a little bit about, the relationship you have with your father and the
Right.
struggle that you had. And I didn't have a relationship with my dad, but I made a choice. And that choice was to become a great dad. It was a conscious choice that when I was approximately 10 years old, I'll never forget. I was mad at my dad for something. I can't remember exactly what. Maybe it spanked me or something, but I remember the thought. I said, when I grow up and have kids, I'm not going to treat my kids the way my dad treats me. And I was probably
Right.
10 or so. But again, it was a conscious choice. Now, the experts will tell you that when a child experiences abuse and trauma as a kid, in most cases, they're going to repeat the same pattern. But in some cases, they'll do the exact opposite. Well, I did the exact opposite. I read books. I went to seminars. I learned how to become a great father. And that process in becoming a great father was, number one, healing my own stuff so that I
Mhm.
wouldn't pass it on to my kids. So talk just a little bit about the importance of how we have to deal with our own stuff if we want to become great fathers.
Yeah. I think the perfect example of this is a men's meeting I was doing a few months ago. And I was talking about how a radio personality shared that he had a breakthrough in therapy. And his breakthrough in therapy was that he realized that he had bitterness toward his dad because his dad would discipline him for not knowing things that his dad didn't teach him in the first place. So he realized that he was in this constant tension with his dad because his dad is disciplining him because he doesn't know, but he's like, I don't know because you didn't teach me. But his dad didn't get that. So his breakthrough in therapy was recognizing that he had bitterness toward his dad. So I referenced that in the seminar or in the meeting to say to the men, it's important to not, another myth I reference in the book is to not believe this myth that manhood is a natural instinct. It has to be taught. You're not just born and because you're biologically male, you then know how to do all these things. It has to be taught. And I was emphasizing the importance of teaching your sons rather than assuming and then being disappointed when they don't meet your standard. And I got some pushback from some of the older gentlemen in the room. And one of them pointed out, I don't want to baby my son and I don't want to do all that extra stuff because I didn't have that stuff growing up. He said, I had to learn how to cook for myself because I didn't have a babysitter. My mother was out working and I was at home by myself and I had to learn how to cook for myself. So I don't want to give my son all that extra stuff because I didn't have that. And before I could respond, I appreciate someone else in the room saying to that man, he said, hey man, you're boasting in your dysfunction. You're wearing your dysfunction as a badge of honor and then denying your son something better just because you had it hard. You should take that and give him something better so he doesn't have to struggle the way that you did.
That's powerful. That's really powerful.
Yeah.
And so, as mentioned, being a great father isn't genetic. It's learned behavior. So for us as men, any man can learn to become a great father. And I believe it begins with, first and foremost, self-love, understanding yourself, unpacking your emotional baggage. And you want to break that generational curse, if you will, to not raise the kids the way you were raised, if the way you were raised was traumatic.
Right.
You want to break that. So that's what's important. So, wow, time flies when you're having fun. So now, Maliek, I want you to just kind of summarize your thoughts with the audience. Actually, first of all, tell people where they can find you and connect with you and your organization. Let's start there first.
Sure. Our website is Whole Brother Mission, WHOLE, wholebrothermission.com. That's also the handle on Instagram. And if you'd like to connect with me directly, I'm Maliek, Maliek, Maliek Blade on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook as well.
And there will be a link below the video. As a matter of fact, if you look below the video here on the podcast, you'll see a link directly to his website. So if you don't remember it, it's below on the link is there. So Maliek, now I just want to give you an opportunity now just to share your final closing thoughts and ideas based on what we've said today and share with the audience what you think.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for having me. And in closing, I would just add that I think that growth in this area in terms of Black men as a whole, it's not just for us, it's for the community and the world as a whole. I know everyone has different ideas about patriarchy and matriarchy and who should be leading and things of that nature, but I do think we all have to agree that we currently live in a society that is heavily led and the power structures are within the hands of men. And if that is the case, it would do the world much good if those men are healthy and emotionally whole and mentally whole. So I do think we all would benefit from an emphasis on men not finding identity in what they do, but finding their true identity by taking the time to process through who they are, why they do what they do, and being self-aware. We applaud success over self-awareness. And I've seen that be very dysfunctional. So this new paradigm, I think, isn't just for Black men, but I'm catering it for Black men. But I think it's something that will benefit us all if men were able to grow in this area. It's something to be open to and to embrace. And lastly, at least I can speak for myself and what I'm presenting, because I know there's somewhat of an ideological war on these things. I don't think the challenge is to be feminine. I think the challenge is to have a more robust view of masculinity.
Yeah. And so, in closing, it is my belief that the greatest challenge we have on the planet right now is to redefine masculinity. And redefining masculinity means that we're not becoming feminine, but we're simply redefining what it means to be a man, because the roles of manhood and masculinity are changing rapidly. You know, a lot of people don't understand or realize that, you know, in America, for the first time in the history of this country, there are actually more women in the workforce than men. There's also more women graduating from college than men. So the roles are changing, they're being reversed. And so for the men who are courageous enough to embrace this new paradigm I'm talking about, it only enhances your life. It only challenges you to recognize that the old paradigm taught us that we had three responsibilities, what I call the three Ps: procreate, provide, and protect. But what we weren't taught is how to connect. And I will assert that what we as men really long for is connection. And yet very few of us know how to create that connection. Well, we can't be relational if we're unwilling to be emotional. Emotions are what drive relationships. And if we don't have the emotional tools to connect, then our lives are going to be kind of empty. So my suggestion is, if you've been struggling with relationships, health, depression, just take a step forward. And that step forward could be contacting Maliek and his organization to gain some support, to support you in working through whatever may be keeping you from experiencing life the way that it was meant to be. Because I believe life was meant to be good, but no one said it would be easy. And so once again, my optimism comes from men like Maliek, who are providing resources that support and empower men, especially Black men. Because now more than ever, we need support, we need empowerment, we need connection. So my hope is that as you've listened to this, if you've been on the fence about asking for help, don't be afraid to. Take that step, take that leap. It'll be the best leap you've ever taken. So with that being said, Maliek, thank you so much, man, for sharing your wisdom. I'll definitely be posting this online and sharing your information, and hopefully send some people your way, because I love the work that you're doing, man, and I applaud you for what you're doing.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
All right, so this has been another episode of Shatter the Stereotypes. So that's what your goal is to do. Shatter the stereotypes about Black men. Go out there and create an extraordinary life. You can do it. We'll see you next episode. Take care.